Thought Media Network is pleased to present The Inclusive Church, Ideas and Resources for Leaders of Multicultural Ministries. The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Tuesdays at 12 noon Mountain Time. Join Tracy and her guests as they go deep and share practical tips and resources you can use in your ministry. And now let's explore the Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here. Welcome to this week's episode of Inclusive Church. OMG. Woo! And the theme for today is link to your values. And what that is about is linking your conversation, your commitment, your focus on inclusion to the values that you have already established. It is not unusual for people who are interacting and building and growing in spiritual community to think that inclusion is either automatic or a distraction. And it always does seem a little confusing to me how people can either see it as a distraction, like we're here to be in spiritual community and talking about diversity is divisive, and it's encouraging people to see separation. So it's a distraction from what we are really here to do, which of course I don't agree with, but I continue to hear that on a regular basis. And then there's this other camp over here that talking about diversity, or especially talking about inclusion, isn't necessary because we're all one. That's a basic spiritual principle. It is so basic that means everyone is included, and we are by nature inclusive. Now, what I often say in relation to that is, by nature, sure, by spiritual nature, we have been designed to be inclusive, and we live in a human environment. I had to choose a nice word. We live in a human environment, or in human societies, where we have been taught and systems have been designed, developed, and reinforced decade after decade, century after century, to teach us not to be inclusive, to teach us to separate, to teach us to create a human hierarchy. And so while the spiritual principle is true, it doesn't mean that we behave in a way that is in alignment with that, unless we pay attention to it and are conscious of it and make intentional and conscious choices. So in writing about this idea that in order to be an inclusive ministry, and in order to lead people in a way that encourages them to behave in ways that are inclusive, we have to not only have an individual or personal commitment as a leader, but we also have to think about how do we lead people in a way that it becomes a priority and a natural way of living for the masses of people. Now, obviously, the masses of people, we could be talking about all society. But today, at least, I am thinking about and focusing on the masses of people who are connected to your ministry or any individual or group ministry. So people in your spiritual community will actually commit to be more inclusive when they understand how that charge, how that challenge links to the values they already know. So most ministries I have been connected to or been exposed to, regardless of religion or spiritual belief system. So I can think of, the Buddhist meditation center that actually 3 different ones that I've been involved with over the years. I can think of the work that I was hired to do with the United Methodist Church. I can think about the Evangelical Lutheran Church that I designed some training for, as well as, the many, many unity churches, the dozens of CSL, Centers for Spiritual Living communities, and even a couple of groups that are, mindfulness organizations or groups. All of them have stated values, right? Many organizations, many ministries do a really good job of communicating their overarching values, not just the spiritual principles, but the values of how they are going to operate as an entity. And it's not unusual to see and observe that those values have then been translated into behavioral standards, right? So, some of the really, 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 really common values, it's not unusual to see integrity or accountability or authenticity. We have open communication. They're words that there are values which then drive our behavior. They're not things within themselves. They are values that then drive our actions or that create patterns of behavior. Now, you don't have to raise your hand because I won't see it. But if you want to put in the chat that you are familiar with some of the organizations where, and I could pick any of these. Let's pick open communication. I'm a part of an organization that says open communication is a very highly regarded value. Yet, in behavior, people avoid conflict, so they're not open about what they are feeling or needing. Or when someone does say what they feel or need and it makes people uncomfortable, they don't communicate about it. They just kind of retreat into silence. Yet, if I ask, what does open communication mean? I get told that, oh, that means that we are open to having tough, difficult conversations. You can bring any issue to me. Please bring it to me directly, and we will talk about it. That decisions are made with the input of many people because we have open communication and we want to hear from lots of people. I hear all of those kinds of descriptions of behavior, but then the behavior doesn't match the descriptions. I don't think that's all that unusual. So for me, it's not a deal breaker because whether it's a corporate organization or a spiritual organization, I see that pattern all the time. And so in this context, it's the reminder that if we say we value X, then people need to know what behaviors that translates into, because our values are invisible. Our values are invisible until we demonstrate them in our behavior. Now, this does not just apply to churches or ministries. This applies to any organization. When I am working with corporations, I'm also very frequently saying, when I'm first being introduced to the organization, can you send me your, stated, your promoted values, the values that drive behavior in your company? And they will send me a list, usually 5 to 8. It's really hard if you have more than 8. But, anywhere from 5 to 8 values, because part of the conversation becomes, how is that demonstrated? What behavioral standards have you created? And then how does this link to what you're trying to do with inclusion or demonstrating that you value diversity? So maybe that's the key point, that it would be true for any organization. And that's why I'm focusing on it today for our ministries, right? How do we link this conversation to our values? So if you're in a ministry or leading a leader in a ministry where the values for the church or the values that this ministry is built around have already been communicated, and you've been talking about it, or people are aware of them, then you want to explain your commitment to honoring diversity and your commitment to being inclusive in the context of those values. One of the big mistakes that people make is adding on, like it's a side dish over here, right? We value diversity, or it's important to be inclusive. And then it becomes like a silo on the side of one more thing I need to learn about or think about. But thinking about and looking at, the values that have already been established, let's say authenticity is one of the values. And you've talked about what that means is really, showing up. It means that you share your thoughts and your feelings. It means that, you don't put on a mask, whatever you've described it to mean. So now you're going to talk about valuing diversity and achieving or demonstrating or manifesting inclusion. And so you already have authenticity on your list. How does authenticity get affected by different cultural norms? Does authenticity mean the same thing with different cultural groups, different age groups, based on gender, race, and ethnicity? How do all of those ways we're different from one another impact our ability to be authentic, our willingness to be authentic, and do we have the skills to navigate when we're asking people to be authentic and it results in some type of cross-cultural clash? Oh, well, it's not that all of a sudden, we have to have diversity training. What we need is to be able to navigate and operate from our already established value of authenticity. And yes, that means people may need to learn some things, like their definition of authenticity is not universal, or the way that they are being authentic is bumping up against the way the next person is being authentic. And we have to develop skills to ensure that authenticity is our foundation and we honor that everyone else other than ourselves is coming, and we expect them to be authentic too. So we have to develop some conflict resolution skills. We have to learn some basics about the impact of culture on authenticity, right? There are things we're doing, but it's not because we have this new silo over here called inclusion. It's because we are operationalizing our already established value of authenticity. Now, I could take almost anything that is a value, that is a representation of values, and use that as an example. It's simple to understand, but it's not necessarily easy to navigate. And that makes me think about this caveat, because I've seen it happen way too much. Don't make the mistake of talking about diversity as if it's one of your values. Don't make the mistake of talking about diversity as if it is one of your values. I'm just pausing for a minute because I know some of you are repeating that in your head. Wait, talking about diversity as one of our values, but isn't it a value? No, it's not. So remember, values, are things like integrity, honesty, authenticity. They're conceptual, and then we have to talk about and turn them into behavior. Diversity is not a behavior. Diversity is a state of being. Diversity exists. Diversity is the divine design. Diversity is. And it's tangible. I can point to someone and say, look, that person is A, B, C, and D. Or I know this person and they identify as X, Y, Z. Right? Diversity is really a state of being. It's not a value. It's not values. Now we can say we value diversity, but we can't say our values include diversity. And when we say we value diversity, it's kind of like, what does that mean? We can say we, in this spiritual community, we honor the diversity of our members and guests. But the value that's related to might be inclusion. Inclusion can be a value, or inclusivity can be a value, but diversity cannot. So if I'm describing my behavior is, I honor diversity by reviewing the images in our social media and marketing materials every 6 months. It's a behavior I'm taking in order to represent the values that we have established around accountability. Every one of the values that you represent are affected by the diversity in your membership, in the guests that attend your events or classes, in the community where you're located, in the community where you serve. Diversity exists in all of those places. And your challenge as a leader is, okay, how do I apply this value as I engage with, or as I involve, or as I attempt to grow with these many different demographics? So the bottom line here for this, thinking today is really, if you've communicated the values that are expected to be demonstrated in your church or ministry, then one of your smart moves is to explain your commitment to honoring diversity and being inclusive using those existing values for your context, right? They're the framework through which you want people to understand the importance of valuing diversity or honoring diversity, which I prefer to use, and demonstrating inclusion. So I'm just thinking, can I leave that? But another thought came to mind before I leave that idea that diversity is not one of your values. Diversity describes a state of being. It exists whether people take action or not. You're going to have diversity if you don't do anything. But you won't have integrity if you don't do anything, because people have to behave in a way that models integrity or that creates the foundation for integrity. So diversity, it's describing differences in people, but it really doesn't require any individual behavior choices to create those differences. The differences exist. And diversity can be used as a metric that you use to evaluate progress, but it cannot be a value in and of itself. Okay, I think maybe I can get off my soapbox around that one, but I'm really not on a soapbox. What I find is that people are confused about it. And when I say diversity is not on your, or should not be on your list of values, they think often that I'm saying that you shouldn't care about it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you absolutely should care about it. You should understand how it impacts your ability to demonstrate those things that are values, that are about that guide your behavior. And what do you need to know in order to be able to deliver on your values? So today, this whole focus on linking your conversation as a leader around inclusion and around diversity to your values is really important. The people in your ministry know what your values are. You don't have to give them additional values. All you have to do is make the connection. And I'm happy to help you do that if you have some confusion about it, or you're not sure how to do that. It's like that's part of why we're doing this show, because this show is about how you can be a leader that helps to create, build, and grow an inclusive environment in your church. And I don't know, I might need to say it every week, but when I use the word church, I'm not talking about a building. I'm not talking about brick and mortar. I'm talking about the people who you are engaged with, the people who you are serving. If we didn't learn anything else about spiritual family during the pandemic years, we learned that the church is not the building. How are we engaging people? Who's involved? Who are the people who resonate with our message and our music? What are the topics that people are hungry for? And how do we deliver that to them if they're not coming to this building? I laugh about this sometimes because people who have been doing virtual ministry before 2020, people who were doing focus ministries before 2020, peoples whose ministries were chaplaincy or pastoral care before 2020, people who were writing and doing webinars and workshops, but not tying them to Sunday morning or Friday noon or Saturday evening, already knew the church is not the building. And church leaders are not just ministers standing in a pulpit or behind a podium. Now, I would guess even before the pandemic, many ministers understood that their job, right, required them to do a lot of things that went beyond standing behind a podium or in the pulpit or on the platform on Sunday mornings. They were teaching classes, they were providing counseling or coaching, right? They were designing events and hosting them. But when you take away the building, you still have church. You have church because you have people, and the people are the church that you are serving, no matter what the physical form or where you're meeting. So inclusive church is really about how do we either get there or how do we expand the work that we are already doing. And I know that many of you are doing a lot of really good work. And that's even why you're interested in this show, because you want either to get validation and reinforcement, or you want to get, is there another idea? Is there an idea that maybe I heard 5 years ago and I need to be reminded of it? Or is there an idea that I've never thought about? So ideas and resources for multicultural ministries is what this show is all about. And today, again, link your conversation. So over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're just going to really reinforce some basics. And then we will be beginning to intersperse other guests coming in and having conversations and having them share what they have actually done that worked, and sometimes what they have done that didn't work, so that you won't make the same mistake. I do want to make a couple of comments before I begin to close out. I do want to make a couple of comments about what if you are leading or a leader in a ministry that has not decided and communicated some established values. What do you do then? Well, in that case, I think it is a good idea for you to invest in some time and get input from a lot of folks about what the values the community is already demonstrating, right? Often we are behaving based on our values, even if we've never written them down or put them in a brochure or posted them in social media. About a year and a half ago, I was working with a group who wanted to define their values. And what I realized as I was talking to them and we were prepping for spending a full day on their values, everyone I talked to, just about, the way they talked and when they gave examples about what's important in this community and how do people resolve conflict. And if I were to, I'm talking to you, but if I were to interview 10 people, what do you think would come up as them saying, what's important here in our behavior? What 2 or 3 things do you think people would say over and over? So they were actually demonstrating values, even though they had not articulated them in one place. They hadn't put them on a list. So it made the work really easy because they were thinking, we're going to have to do all this work and we're going to have to create something new and it's going to take a lot of brain power and we're going to be arguing over it. And it wasn't that at all, because I got them to see their behavior was already demonstrating key values. They valued, working hard. They valued honesty. They valued accountability. Their values included a lot of things that all we did was take their behavior and then translate that into the top 10 conceptual things that represented. And then from there, we narrowed it down to the top 5. And then integrating that and announcing that, people throughout the community were like, oh, now in their case, one of their top 5 values was inclusivity. Like accountability was in there and inclusivity was in there. And it made sense for inclusivity to be a value because it requires behavior to make it so. Diversity wasn't the value, but inclusivity was a value, and behavior that they were already demonstrating that made that clear was the way they were educating themselves about diversity and the behavioral things they were already requiring leaders to do to be sure they were inclusive of people from different cultural groups, different sexual orientation and gender expression identities, people from different age groups, and people as much as possible representing different racial and ethnic identity groups. And I say as much as possible because of where this community was located. There is racial and ethnic diversity, and they may not have the same opportunities as a community that is in a major urban area, because they don't have as much variety in racial, ethnic identity groups as maybe right here in Dallas, Texas, right? Because they're in a smaller community in a state where there is less racial and ethnic diversity, but there is some, and they were already doing work related to that. So they were demonstrating the value of inclusion or the value of inclusivity before I even got there, and it wasn't new. So it made sense for inclusivity to be one of their values. So if you have not formed values, or if you're in a community that right now is deciding that you are going to refresh your values and your value statements, then you might have inclusion or inclusivity as a value. Again, it requires behavior in order to deliver on that. But please, please do not allow the conversation to go to diversity as one of our values. So that might be all that I have to say about this topic today. As many of you know, in my book, Stained Glass Spirit, the focus was on why we should even be having this conversation in our spiritual communities. It's the why about how our spiritual belief systems mandate or create a spiritual imperative for us to have these conversations and do this work. And so if you want more information about that, or throughout the week you want to just see different quotes or connect with different resources that will help you have that conversation and this conversation about being an inclusive multicultural ministry, then please go visit me over at stainedglassspirit.net. But what I'd really invite you to do is mark your calendars for next Tuesday at 12 noon Mountain Time, and join me as we dive into some more foundational level things to think about if we are committed to having, growing, inspiring, and inclusive church. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm so glad that you joined me today, and I hope to see you right here on the New Thought Media Network again.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.